Welcome everybody to Funeral Nation episode 227. That is Jeff, the Funeral Commander Harbison. I am Ryan Thogbarton, and this is the funeral profession's only weekly news show. Man, do we have a good one today.
We have a huge one. If you are in our profession and you know the name Frank Campbell from New York, we have a very special guest on today that does planning for them. So you don't want to miss this. You want to listen to what Jennifer Muldowney has to say. And speaking of not missing something, we've got a couple things to talk about. But our folks at C&J, you know what? We're having a ball right now because we are helping so many families realize their dreams. And you know, it's interesting to caveat onto Jennifer's that if a family has life insurance, they typically spend 32% more in a funeral. That's the difference between having a memorial service and really a celebration of life. Mm-hmm. So think about that, but let's go ahead and run that promo real quick.
We may be the largest insurance assignment company in the funeral profession, but that doesn't mean we've lost touch with our roots. Here in Rainbow City, Alabama, our priorities still come down to a welcoming smile and a handshake that says we keep our promises. With all the tools and technologies that assure blazing fast turnaround, what really matters is much more old school. Personal responsibility, integrity, relationships, and the pride that comes from hearing yet another client say, "You came through for us when it mattered." C&J eliminates the challenges that funeral homes have in processing insurance death claims. If cash flow is vital to your business, welcome home.
So, Ryan, I'm excited. We have some big news this week. One of the industry's icon superlatives, our friend, my cigar buddy, great photographer, Mr. Dan Katz is turning in his pencils, if you will. Yes. And he's moving on to another world of his passion of photography and, you know, retiring, if you will, from LA ads. I'm sure he'll be sneaking around the halls somewhere, bothering someone. But Dan, you've been a consummate professional. You've been someone that I've known through my whole career here in the funeral business. And we wish you the very best and want to let you know you make great contributions to our profession as well.
For sure. Best of luck to you, Dan, in future endeavors. Dan's been a part of a lot of pretty iconic out-of-the-box campaigns, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, they've come up with some great stuff, and he's been right at the forefront. So speaking of great stuff, yeah, looks like NFDA is going full bore. We're going to be in Nashville together. Things are getting better. However, we're just coming off another large convention that was done virtually. And once again, from a supplier perspective, well, Ryan, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I mean, I've had a lot of conversations, obviously, in the last year about the value of the virtual conference, and I think that it was evident. You know, here's what I think the virtual conferences are missing that the associations aren't understanding is, as a supplier, do we come to the conference to get exposure? Yes, but that is secondary value. The exposure is great. We want people to know that we exist, yada, yada, yada. But the real value of the exhibits is the one-on-one connections that we can have with customers and funeral professionals, other colleagues, other suppliers, like that one-on-one connection. Jeff, we've said it 100 times on the show, the most value of a conference happens at the bar than it ever does on the exhibit floor. And that's what is missing from these virtual conferences is there's been a lot of advances in, we can have supplier showcase videos and we can upload videos to our page and have downloads and do all of these things. But if there's not the ability to have the one-on-one connection and have the conversation easily without having to navigate away from where you're supposed to be, that's the puzzle piece that is missing that allows these things to be valuable. And I think that that's been overlooked. You know, I think virtual conferences have done what they can to try to maximize the opportunities for exposure. Again, there's nothing wrong and bad with exposure, but it's the conversation. If I can't easily communicate with that person virtually in a chat or reply them like I can on any social network and have this one-on-one conversation, we've now sucked the value out of why we show up to these events.
You're right. It's engagement. right? It's the
Yeah,
engagement is the key. And interesting, you said something about showing videos and, a ad or something that comes up. We're already doing that,
that's right.
right? We do that through LinkedIn. We do it through any type of social media out here. We do it through email campaigns. So we have the exposure. It's the engagement that we're after because of that exposure. And so if you're doing a virtual conference and you show a video, but you can't engage with the people there, or it's difficult, then that negates the entire process. But anyway, so much for that fun conversation. We're getting back into real stuff. I'm going to Wisconsin next month for their Funeral Directors Association. So it's warmed up there, and I'm going to be able to go. Anyway, so we have Jennifer Muldowney, who's coming on. She's a dear friend of mine. I've known her for years, and she is really passionate about telling the life story, and she's made quite a name for herself internationally. So let's go ahead and roll that interview with Jennifer. Jennifer, welcome back to the Funeral Nation show. We were just talking before coming on air, if you will, that I think you were with us a long time ago when we first got started, weren't you?
I was. I had a different hat on at that point. Well, different kind, sort of. Yeah, I was with Eco Legacy back then.
That's right. And now you really have continued to evolve in the funeral business, just like you and I were talking. I'm the same way. It just, good things keep coming to those who work at it. Right, Ryan? Is that
That's
part
right.
of the mantra? And so, Jennifer, share a little bit about yourself and reacquaint the Funeral Nation to your business, what you do, and we'd love to just chat with you about some of the things that you're experiencing and working on now.
For sure, Jeff. Well, thanks for having me, guys. And it's nice to see faces after the hellish year that everybody's been through. This is how we see each other these days. It's great. But yeah, I last time I was on with you guys, I was with Eco Legacy. But interestingly, what I'm doing currently, and I'm currently residing in New York, haven't been able to go home to my lovely hometown of Dublin in Ireland in a year and a half, which I know is not huge for a lot of people, but for me, I'd probably have been home 10 times. But yeah, what I'm doing right now, I started 10 years ago in Ireland with Farewell Funeral Planners back home in Ireland, and I never stopped doing it. So even when I was with Eco Legacy, I was still always hunting down this idea of a memorial, or the new funeral, as I'm actually liking to call it, because I know, among the funeral community, a funeral is with body and a memorial is without. To me, they go hand in hand, and I don't think Joe Public really cares what we call it. So yeah, I started 10 years ago called Farewell Funeral Planners back home in Ireland. I was a wedding planner, but for funerals, and it was born out of, like many of us, it was born out of loss. I found myself sitting at two of my friends' funerals. One was 23, one was 28, and gone too soon, of course. And I was dealing with my grief. I was a wedding planner and a party planner at the time, which suits my personality for sure. When people meet me, they're like, funerals, really? But I was obviously dealing with my grief. Logistically, my brain goes to that event planning mode. And then like most 20-year-olds, when faced with their own mortality, I was like, wait, what? Wait, what? This could happen to me? This doesn't just happen to old people. This doesn't just happen to people who are sick.
Right.
Holy feck. I'm being a little bit soft there with my cursing. But yeah, it was a huge wake-up call for me. So I went home and I did what most people do nowadays, and I hit Google and I started Googling things, and I thought, okay, well, if I'm dying of cancer in hospital, and I don't want to go to a church, or I don't want to go to a funeral, or I just want to plan it myself because, hey, I'm an event planner. How do I go about this? And there was nothing, absolutely nothing for the Irish market. I found lots of statistics on the US and the UK, and nothing for Ireland. And so very fast forward, my book came out, my first book, How to Plan a Funeral in Ireland, Say Farewell Your Way. And that sort of kick-started it. I've since done a TEDx talk, worked with many funeral clients. I'm now creative director with Frankie Campbell's here in New York City, which, if anybody knows anybody in the funeral industry, typically know of it. And yeah, it just honestly, it's just gone from strength to strength, especially in the last 3 years. And equally with COVID, yes, did my work go on pause like everybody else's did, even though I was in the death industry, because people were just doing direct cremation. They were worried about COVID and survival as opposed to funerals where we couldn't gather and things like that. Whereas now, this year, I'm already out the door. It's absolutely jam-packed because people are having memorials on the anniversary of the death of their loved one. And yeah, as you and I were talking, Jeff, like it's not a party. It's not planning it's not dancing on people's graves. That's never what it's about. I'm not trying to take away the funeral ritual. In fact, I emphatically believe in having a funeral or a memorial or a service. So those who didn't get to have one last year during COVID, I believe you should try and have some sort of a service in person, even if it's just 2 or 3 people and you Zoom everybody else in, whatever it might be. I believe it's a blueprint to start the grief process. But it's actually about celebrating people's life. I think it's the first line of my first book where I say, I don't want people to mourn that I'm gone. Like, obviously I want them to be sad. I mean, they better be sad or I'll come back and kick their asses. But I want them to celebrate whatever time they had me. So even if they had me for 39 now, moving on, but even if it's tomorrow, and you and Jeff, you and I were talking about this, like, none of it's guaranteed. Like, it could happen to any of us tomorrow, and I'm sorry, it's not ageist. It doesn't just look for the old and they've lived their life. And so I'd rather people celebrate the 39 years that they had me. And equally on top of that, every single person, I usually say 90%, but honestly, I've not found one person who has actually said, oh, no, I don't want people to celebrate my life. No. I just want them to, mourn that I'm not there anymore. And I just want them to be miserable. And I've not met one person. Like, yes, people are being, sometimes they're funny and they're like, oh yeah, well, I want, dramatics and, tears and whatever. And I'm like, well, even that in itself is a celebration of your life. You want that. So you're very specific. So yeah, I've evolved. And actually I did a radio show back home in Ireland where it was a couple of years ago, where the lady said, she was like, it's interesting, you really entered into this funeral community and you have just evolved. And I have. But at the same time, the ethos has still been the same the entire way through. It's about celebrating the life of our loved ones, because every single one of us are unique. That was what my TED Talk was about. It's about how special and unique each one of us are. Our heartbeats are different. Like, it's incredible when you start to get into how unique each human being is. My mind is blown. So we're lucky to be alive. And honestly, then we're lucky to die, in a sense. We're lucky to have had even the moments that we've had alive. And so why not celebrate them? So.
Sure. And, Jennifer, it's interesting because, again, you've been preaching this mantra, or that's been, rather than that, it's been your passion. That's where you've been, right? So it's not something that you're doing because, this is my vocation. You're doing it because you're passionate about it. Just like all of us are passionate about anything that we're involved with. Hopefully, if it's a job, then it's not a passion. And so, I find it fascinating. You made, a couple of remarks there, especially with COVID last year, that just because it was prevented, that's just the way it was, and you didn't have a choice. But people are starting to come back around and have second services and or celebrating the life versus the service itself. And I think that's a grand idea. I know, Ryan, you've had some pieces on that and thought about it. And so, from a funeral home's perspective, why don't we, kind of unpack what would you do now? So I had 100 deaths during COVID last year. What are some of the ideas to reach back out and say, hey, I'm glad we served you. It was a tough time. Would you be interested in creating some type of celebration of life? Is that inappropriate to do so?
I'm assuming that's aimed at me. So, yes. So I absolutely believe it's appropriate, because as a funeral director in a community, that's who you're serving, is your community. And so, it's not like It depends on how it's dressed up, Jeff, to be honest. I'm not a fan of, the sales calls that a lot of funeral homes do. And I'll never forget back home in Ireland when I found a coupon in a newspaper for a funeral. I was like, this is just so wrong.
It's a pizza. If it happens over the weekend, you get a discount.
Yeah. So it depends on how it's dressed up. And I'm sure Ryan can talk to this. He's the marketing guru, especially when it comes to online. But, even as you guys have seen, online has evolved dramatically, and even more so in the last year and a half. Us even doing the Zoom, we actually did it back then. I think it was like 4 or 5 years ago we did our first one, but this is the norm now. This is how you meet people. Jeff, you and I were having drinks, practically. Like, it's different. I was telling you about how, having chats with my dad, and how that's become just the norm now, because this is what we do. So you really have to. One of the biggest things that I promote in my business is meet people where they're at. So I am sick to death of hearing in a funeral home, "I'm sorry for your loss, my condolences." I can't stand when they say that to families. Now, I get it. I get it. It's inbred in us as human beings, but I can't stand it because it's so generic and it means nothing. And it's like when you go up to Starbucks or McDonald's and they're just like, "What's your order?" And they ream off a spiel. I was only on a sales call last night and I had to stop her. I was like, stop selling at me. You need to meet people where they're at. And so, if that's throwing a fundraiser in the community, if it's having a Broadway night or having a comedy night or some sort of something where you sponsor it, and maybe you just have somebody there present who talks about the new memorial, or, maybe there's something that says, if you've lost somebody during COVID and want to talk, we're here for you. Having a grief counselor there. There's so many different ideas, and it's all about just marketing, but meeting people where they're at. Nobody likes to be sold at. Nobody. People buy from people. And if you're not there for them, and if you, during those 100 families that you had during COVID, if you didn't show up for that family, yeah, more than likely they are going to probably turn you down if you try and ring up with a hard ass sales call. But if you were there for them and you empathized with them in a real human connecting way, the chances are when you ring up and you say, "Hey, Mary, listen, how are you doing?" And just start off with that. Maybe start it off with just a phone call of, "How are you doing?" Okay, and ended with, "If there's anything I can do, anything at all, if you're thinking of having a certain," and it can be just a slight little nugget that you just leave at the end of the conversation. You don't need to seal it's taking the profit and the sales call out of what we do, because unfortunately, yes, is it a business? Yes, it absolutely is, but it's about human beings. And much like if you went into a hospital and they started suddenly, maybe you to get your, I don't know, a tooth out, and then all of a sudden a plastic surgeon shows up and is like, "Well, while we're in there, do you want us to add, your bum cheek up into your eyeball," or whatever they do these days? You'd be like, "What?" It's just about human beings, and that's really, I don't think we've lost that. Like, I'm so pro the funeral community, but I think the media hound the funeral community on the inhumane parts of it, and I think it's up to us to just constantly show up as human beings. And that's really, honestly, that's the essence of my business.
Well, and that's something, Ryan, I'd like for you to speak on, is just being a presence in the community, and even putting social media out. Hey, if you lost a loved one, have you thought about? Some of those things, not being a hard sell. If you don't mind speaking on that, Ryan.
Yeah, 100%. I love what you just said, people to people. And that's one of the things we call P2p marketing. We never talk to our funeral home clients or supplier clients. It's not B2B, it's not B2C, it's people to people. And when you can provide value and build relationship as the foundation, then the other things happen naturally from that conversation. And we have seen through social media where there's conversation starters, and that's really what it takes a lot of the time, is just to start the conversation. Consumers don't expect it from the funeral home because they've got preconceived ideas of how funeral homes market and how they push. So when a conversation comes into play and they're actually communicating back and forth on a two-way street with the funeral home, there's a comfort that wasn't there before. And so I agree with you 100%. It's people to people, it's building a relationship, and it's starting the conversation and presenting an idea versus presenting a sales tactic. And I think that's something I would love for you to address, Jennifer, because a lot of the conversation that we have in my prior life on the vault side, and we would talk about personalization and memorialization with funeral homes. Yeah, my consumer is never going to pay for that. That just isn't. Yeah, no, you don't know. My consumer is different, and we've proven time and time again, when given the opportunity, that that's not true. It's not every family, but it's not always true. So you're doing planning. Can you give us a peek into that ecosystem of what's different about what you're doing versus just the traditional service?
Sure, absolutely. And, I think one of the most important things to touch on in this is, and I've just spent like my last rant resisting it, but it is money. And in terms of that's our families. So one of the things I know for sure when they see the funeral director ringing them is, oh God, sales pitch. It's like when you walk into a store and you see the associate, hi, is there anything I can help you? And you're just like, oh my God, I don't have the money, go away quick, and you immediately just close up. And so again, it comes back to the idea of meet people where they're at. Mm-hmm. So if you've got that family and they're absolutely devastated and still brokenhearted and they never got to have a service, and you are well aware that they can't afford your services, and that's, I guess, entirely up to you as well as to your clientele, and that's your business. Your business is your business. But you can still meet people where they're at. There's still ways for you to help people. And it might just get you karma points. It might just get you good kudos points. And it might just get you a couple of $100. And that's just it. But for example, I obviously have just said, I work with Frankie Campbell's, which is, one of the most expensive funeral homes in the country. It's what I keep calling the Chanel of funeral homes, although I think I've been told that I'm not cool anymore because apparently Chanel are not that as great as, to me, that's like the Chanel, okay? So I need to upgrade on my branding. But there's still ways to help people. They might not have the budget of millions or hundreds of thousands. Sure, have I done memorials for 150,000? I have. But could I do one for 1,500? I absolutely could. And so what it entails is really just gathering people together. So you need to sit down and decide what it is. Dream the dream. Sit down and go, okay, if I was to do this memorial the way I want to do it for my dad, what would that look like? Sit down, put that on paper, have a glass of wine, do whatever you have to do. Do it with your brother, do it with your sister, do it with your mother, do it with whoever you feel is involved. Sit down, brainstorm it, throw it all down on a piece of paper, sleep on it, and then come back to it. Okay, where can we be creative? So for example, one of the things I did at the start of the year was create a movie. We literally did a movie. Instead of having a funeral service, we had a memorial movie where it was like a This Is Your Life. And we interviewed this gentleman's, his friends, his colleagues, his siblings. We interviewed them. We took snippets of his story. We took snippets of video we could find. We went into the archives. We took photos. We put a movie together, a 30-minute movie. And it was incredible, absolutely incredible. Hollywood, if you're calling, I'm ready. I'm ready for the call. Joking. But it was absolutely incredible. Did it cost a lot of money? It did. And I thought to myself, right, but what if I wanted to do something like that? Let's be honest, I'm certainly not rolling in it. And I thought I could definitely do it. I would just have to be a little bit more hustly and I would just have to figure it. But there's so much technology. And again, Ryan, I'm not into you, but there's so many free apps out there, especially since COVID. There are so many slideshow design apps. There are so many movie design apps. Apple itself, it's inbuilt into your phone, the iMovie. There's so many free opportunities out there for you to, yes, is it not going to look as seamless and as polished as, $100,000 movie or whatever it might be? Sure, but it's not about that. And that's really what the essence of every memorial I do comes down to is, does this represent the person that everybody has lost and the person that they're there to celebrate the life of, whatever that can look like. And so, yeah, there are loads of different ways to incorporate. Zoom has obviously opened up a complete free opportunity for you to engage with everybody all over the world. Can you do it yourself? Yes, you can. Can you hire in professionals if you can afford it? Yes, you can. And so it's about taking all of these options, putting a price tag on them, and then seeing, okay, well, who in the family can help with this? Is there a videographer? Is there a singer? Is there a musician? And honestly, I'm a celebrant as well. And one of the things when I'm in my celebrant role with a family is trying to get them to incorporate as many of their family members as possible. Now, can that have its faults as well? Absolutely, because then World War III breaks out amongst families. Right. But here's where it comes to, but do you have the budget? So sure, if you don't have the budget, there are things that sometimes you just have to put up with, or you have to just skip over, or maybe not have it look as polished. But in the end of it, you can absolutely achieve the same goal. And I think that's really what it's about. So
sure. And Jennifer, the way to reach you to chat about this, because I'm sure there's some funeral directors listening right now that may say, you know what, help me out. Certainly you do consulting and all that. Muldowney Memorials, right? Yep. We have to put that up here so they can see it. But you're exactly right. I mean, I went through a personal tragedy, and that's what we were sharing about, and it was a wonderful. I'm happy and excited talking about my son's funeral. Did he die and I hate it? Yes. But the way we celebrated his life was right on point. And I remember at the funeral home when we would meet with families, we tell them, we're not here because your loved one died. We're here because they lived.
Yeah.
And yeah, you can use that. I just saw Jennifer's go.
Yeah, excellent.
So we'll negotiate how that works out. But anyway, so folks, if you want some good advice and just to chat with somebody that really knows how to throw a party, reach out to Jennifer at Muldowney Memorials. You're on LinkedIn. That's how we've always stayed connected. And certainly we look forward to see some of the things that comes on. It'll be interesting. You also have a podcast still, correct?
It's coming out. Yes, it's been slow. It's slow because of my lack of self-esteem, which is shocking. But I actually am going to do I'm going to do a whole episode on that because it's been an adventure. It's been a trip. But yeah, it is coming out. So hopefully coming out before my birthday in 2 weeks. So
all right, good. Well, we'll look forward to that one too. How about that? Anyway, thanks for coming on and sharing with us, and you're always a welcome friend and guest.
Thanks, guys. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you. Jeff, here's the thing that I love. I love it when people can think big, and there's nothing is off limits. And that's Jennifer. When a family comes to her, there's no limit to what can be done or what can be celebrated, whether it's very, very small or a massive gathering. And, I think that we get in mindsets sometimes that limit our thinking of what a family wants or what a family is willing to do, because we put restrictions on just the way that we think, and we cap it. So kudos to Jennifer for carving out a niche, and really, I love what she says of meeting the consumer where they're at. And that's something that we don't do very often. We think that we do, but we don't do it to the extent that we should be.
I agree. Well, Ryan, we're creeping up on Memorial Day of 2021. I'm headed down to the Outer Banks of North Carolina to visit with family and enjoy that a little bit. You guys are staying here in Scottsdale area?
We are. We're going to be packing up some moving trucks to go to a new rental. So busy weekend doing that.
Good. Yeah. 102. Let me know how you like that, buddy.
You're doing right.
Anyway, hey, it's always a pleasure on here. We'll reconnect next week. We've got some folks lined up to come to us that are really interesting within our business, like Jennifer, that we typically don't see. So I'm excited for our guests line up in the next 2 to 3 weeks.
Absolutely. All right, Commander. Until next time, have a great effing week.
Out here.